Hey guys, it's Carnifex, another Nerd. This video. Today we are going over Gods and Legends Tier 7 Erochar Guide. This is not going to be me giving you little pieces of, hey, here's guys that I like in the raid. I like my top 5 raid characters guides. This is not, hey, here's how to attack Erochar effectively. This is going to be on out, all of our tips, all of our tricks that we use to have the first 2 teams to clear. I'm sure some of these are being used, and some of the team requirements and such are by the 3rd team, which is now finished Tier 7, and they did it before another guild that has significantly more team power than them. So strategy does matter, and strategy can certainly help you clear a lot sooner than you would have. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of people who just don't have the team ready yet, whether they're free to play or they're just not whaling quite as hard as some of these other teams, right? So obviously, part of the secret is being there. Part of the reason these teams are there right now is because they spent money playing the game. So I'm not trying to pretend like it's all strategy. You got to get there, and some people are able to get there faster as they put money into the game. So but here are the strategy pieces that you will use when you have the teams ready. So as for things like minimum requirements, and this is kind of like set up to be a minimum requirements guide in a way, because I know that a lot of people are not clearing this yet. So for minimum requirements, it might be possible if you just put so much effort to have all your teams at that are being used at like Gear 9 and be able to clear it, but you're going to cause yourself a lot of stress. If you can get at least your DPS to Gear 10, it's going to be a lot better quality of life for you in clearing this raid regularly. Solid but appropriate runes. You don't need all blue runes with like double hits on speed secondaries. Like, you don't need that. You need appropriate runes, so they have the right primaries and the right sets for the characters. If they're a damage dealer or if they're a healer, they need a damage set. If they're a damage dealer, they probably need a crit chance set, and if they're a healer, it might be crit chance, might be health for that final 2 pieces. If you're a tank, you're going to be getting some kind of mitigation, probably at least 1 health and defense rune, and then rune set, and then figure it out from there. There are some times where tenacity and potency makes sense, either as a primary or as a rune set. Pretty much everyone wants to have speed. Salvador is the one exception right now, and all your DPS are going to want to have probably a crit damage primary on the south rune, and the others it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge. This is not a rune video, I'm not going into that, but my point is with that is a lot of these guys that are contributing 10+% damage on this raid, they don't have all blue runes on those teams. We don't have enough runes to even accomplish that yet. So don't feel like you have to be there, although certainly it can help when you have those stronger primaries from the higher star levels. And then the most valuable ability upgrades. There's going to be some minimum ability recommendations as we get into it. You do not need to be all maxed on all characters in order to clear this. That's not how it is. Some of them you pretty much do, because otherwise you add too much RNG in, or you just don't give yourself big enough numbers, or you don't include the necessary mechanics. So there are some that either an ability is recommended to be maxed out, or the entire character is recommended to be maxed out. But you do not have to do that for every character. So strategy, you want to have, sorry, I missed one part there. You want to have everyone doing about 8% damage on average in order to comfortably clear this. That allows for some teams to do a little stronger, some teams to do a little better, and with a reasonable standard deviation, you're still going to be clearing this raid. Your strongest members, and we obviously had a lot more than 3, but there's a specific reason you want to have at least 3 strong members with an essentially maxed out team. As much as they're kind of able. You want at least those strongest members, you're going to expect them to be contributing 3 or more teams. Everyone else, you can carry people if people are compensating for that, but I'm assuming that again this is a guild they're all kind of about the same. They're trying to hit and finish T7 as soon as possible. You should expect everybody to contribute 2 teams. For the strategy, you do not want to have everyone focus on having 4+ raid teams. We were looking into that initially, having essentially a team for every mini-boss, and then a good team against Erochar, and then kind of like a decent-ish team against Erochar. But fairly quickly into that, we figured out it was just more effective to focus more, but to have at least 2 teams. And then you can expand from there, obviously. But the reason you want 3 or more great teams, again, those OP players with their maxed out arena teams, right, that are using like at least pieces of that, The reason for this is because if you intentionally set them up with, 8 to 10% left on a boss, because they should be able to clear with that if this is really that strong of a team, all of their units should survive, and they will actually retain all of those characters for future fights against bosses. Hypothetically, you could use a single team against every single boss in this raid if that team finished all 3 of those mini bosses. So that allows you to really amplify your strongest members' contributions more, particularly because a well-built Freezard or Master Duo is advised to be in each of those 3 teams, as they are the only 2 characters who can apply slow right now, and slow is really significant against Erochar in particular. It's great against all of them, but it's particularly important against Erochar because it reduces the frequency of those scales being thrown up, and it gives you bigger windows to do unmitigated damage. So you're going to divide up these boss assignments before you start based on who has the recommended or closest to the optimal recommended teams for those mini bosses. It's right now Hard Orc and Erochar are generally the easiest because people have certain characters that are good against them built up because they're currently useful right now in the arena meta and some other areas of the game where we're building up. So, whereas Soleus and Megabil are a bit harder because those characters can be harder to attain, and you can kind of, it's harder to justify investing in those characters if you're like a free-to-play or a slower grower. So you're best, but you got to divide those boss assignments beforehand so you don't end with, smashing Hard Orc and then kind of struggling in everybody else, and then by the time you get to Erochar, if at all, you don't have anything left. So the main mechanics to pay attention to against all bosses, and you'll see how there's been someone to kind of account for that in each of these teams as we're able. Again, we only have so many characters that do certain things right now, so we may not be able to utilize every mechanic against every boss, but it's at least been considered. And those 2 are reducing or eliminating debuffs and applying slow. So the recommended mini-boss teams, again, like disclaimer, right? These are the recommended lineups if you are fielding a team for every mini-boss without having saved a team from finishing another boss. When you are focusing, make reasonable substitutions. It would have taken forever for me to put like, hey, here's a bunch of substitutions. I'm going to add a few characters at the end who are kind of my honorable mentions who can be useful when substituted in certain areas. But for the most part, they should be fairly logical. I give the example of, replace Kelrian, who's on the Hard Orc team. If you are not assigned with Ken Lee, if you're not assigned to fight Mega Wheel, which is where Ken Lee is recommended. So no legendaries can be featured in this version. For those of you who do have Soleus, or if Soleus comes back around, he is best against Erochar and Hard Orc, and probably by then it's going to be a lot easier anyway. It won't have to be as optimized as it is here, but that's where you want to use them, and frankly, it's fairly logical team comps. May update the video then, we'll see. Some considerations are made for which characters make sense to build up in other areas of the game. So some of them, if they're integral, we put them in there. We don't care if they're useless for everything else. Very few of them are, but anyway. So, but just some consideration has been made for like, hey man, like, can I at least have this guy be useful for something other than that? So abilities are recommended minimums as listed here. They are not saying this is what people were at whenever they cleared it. They may have been, but they almost certainly were at least higher in certain areas. X's are helpful for more sustain or damage, but are not as integral to the strategy. For example, if you look at Rantha right here, right? Her primary, which is her basic, right, which does damage, is rated in an X because she's more about the off-tanking, she's more about the leadership, stuff like that. And so the amount of damage she puts out is considerably less. She's about the multi-hits whenever we get to Erochar. So it's not as integral to the strategy, whereas if you go to someone like Revel, both because of the damage output and because of the mechanics present from those upgrades, you're gonna need to go a little higher, right? But X's are not the same as a 1. If it is a 1, it essentially has no value for the raid. The main place you're going to see that is for leaderships for characters that you are not using their leadership in that party. All right, so first up, Soleus. This is for a bleed team, and this member is not going to be fighting against Erochar, or they're going to be finishing. Because you need to have Rantha in particular. Rantha's the main one. This is why I say the main mechanic of player is bleed. Soleus takes normal damage from physical attacks, and bleed increases by 10%. Increases that physical damage by 10% on top of ticking for damage. That beats up Revel for some serious damage. Rantha is the one that you would want to use against any optimized Erochar, as a member of any optimized Erochar team. But Soleus is one of the harder bosses, and you can totally use a Tromgar lead and get it done. You can sub in a Morth, you can sub in some other people, Puncher Face. But you are better off having a fixed, member of your crew. Hey, we know you're going to be our Erochar people, because it's really not that hard to do like 10+% against Erochar. It's really not. Whenever you have the right characters in the composition. So you're better off kind of letting everyone else who's not going to be going up against Erochar use their Ranthas here, gain the benefits of the clan bonus damage, particularly whenever you're adding all this bleed action. So recommended, right? Rantha, with basically you caring about her leadership and her getting max health on her battle poo summon for off tanking. You can, again, so like that's an example, right? You can easily boost his leadership more, but it's so costly, right? To get that last 8%-ish of her, I think it's 8% of her clan damage, and that's not unuseful, but it's just it can be hard to justify. And I'm trying to do minimum requirements. Tromgar, you want his basic and his taunt to be maxed, and you want him to get about 4. That's a very cost-effective ability level for those abilities. Revel, gotta have basically everything maxed out of the first 4. Having his AoE maxed is even better. I'm not going to go as far as say it is necessary, because it is a really costly upgrade. It's a final upgrade. But the other ones, now Hard Orc, he's one of those guys where, yeah, you got to have everything on him max, because everything about him is really good for this raid. He's going to be applying damage. He does really solid damage. It's physical damage, which is unmitigated against Soleus. He gives you bleed stacks with his basic, which is great. Now, you are going to use both of his specials, so it's not like he's been using it super frequently, but having it on basic along with Revel allows those stacks to really build up against Soleus, because hopefully you're clearing these ads with some degree of frequency, and so the AoE ones generated from Snorri are kind of to help get rid of them faster, and not so much about your sustained bleed stacks for Revel. He's also going to provide you some really good buffs. Damage increase, right? Really amping up Revel. The biggest one is actually the cheat death, though. You can pop it up right before Soleus is about to use his AoE, and nobody actually dies. Rock on, right? You can, and he also applies regen from that, so there's a lot of use there. Cleansing, his passive cleanses those irritating blinds. You don't have to worry about them anymore. So that's really, really useful. And ability blocking the tanks. If they are around, not only does it do damage to them, but it gives a chance to block that taunt if it's ready to be used. And Snorri, we all know he's part of the Wombo combo with Revel. He's able to apply some bleed stacks. He's able to amplify Revel, and he's able to do some damage to the ads. So definitely Snorri is recommended. Now, as you can see, only Revel and Hard Orc are bolded here. They're the two that are integral to this strategy. Again, I've already said you can use Tromgar. It's possible, and still get get sufficient damage. It's possible to replace Snorri, maybe if you need some more sustain, or with Puncher Face. Puncher Face is kind of one of my honorable mentions that you're only going to get if you watch this video, because it's not in the guide. Because he can apply taunt on everyone in order to help you circumvent those taunts if they do come up through Hard Orc, or if you don't have Hard Orc yet and you're just trying to do your part, right? Hard Orc is going to take a while for a lot of people to unlock. Puncher Face is a really solid substitute there because of the forced taunt on all characters. All right, so there we go. We went through Soleus. Now we're going to Mega Wheel. This is our turn meter reduction team, which is at TMR. TMR is valuable against all bosses except Erochar, who is immune, but particularly Mega Wheel because of how quickly his soft and rage stacks build up without it, as well as the frequency of his specials, which include summons of 2 DPS who are kind of a pain in the butt. So it is also valuable when featured on every remaining boss. If Master Duo does not apply slow on his first turn, restart until he does. As you will see, Master Duo is listed as a required character. You don't have to beef him up insanely because he's not necessarily going to be providing a ton of your damage, but he applies 30% TMR with his basic whenever the enemy is already slowed. That's really significant. We're going to pair him up with some other TMR peeps, which again, if you are fighting Mega Wheel, you don't need to have Robin bad. You don't, at this position, you don't need to have Foul. This is as if you were fielding the 4+ teams and then make reasonable substitutions as necessary. I will say all the stacking TMR can really lock up Mega Wheel, and since he doesn't do that much damage, since he's more of like a tanky boss, you can really stack some stuff up with some fairly mediocre characters. Kin Lee is no one's first choice, and especially after that dodge nerf. And the other characters you don't ever see on like an arena team really, maybe with the odd Foul every once in a while. But anyway, so Kin Lee, don't put Tromgar in here because the counters are going to increase Mega Wheel's turn meter faster. We don't like that. So Kin Lee is currently kind of like second best in slot tank, and we're going to use Kelrian later for a reason I'll get into against Hard Orc. Blah, 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 blah. Where am I at? Oh, Master Duo. So, the TMR we've already talked about in the slow. If you don't hit slow the first time, restart it. Getting his second 2 abilities to 3 can be useful, particularly to add the counter attack on his self buff, and he gets himself some additional turn meter himself. I would only use that if Mega Wheel has, again, like 10% turn meter or less. Because it is so crucial to keep that slow down. That slow only has a 50% chance to apply. Illyria, so she applies potency decrease. So this team has no passive cleansing. If I was really being obnoxious, I could tell you, use Darien with the max leadership, but he's completely useless for everything else because basically his lead allows order members to cleanse a debuff from themselves 50% of the time on their turns. So obviously that could help fill that debuff cleansing slot, but it's just so not worth, and that's why I say some considerations have been made. So Illyria is pretty good at healing, and she's going to crank out some decent damage. There aren't any other elves in this lineup. You can make substitutions if you want. But that potency decrease is really helpful. Really helpful mechanic, and a lot of us are building Illyria in order to unlock Ember, at least at some point anyway. And she's definitely superior to at least the current version of Sen-GL. Foul. She gives herself turn meter with her basic when maxed, and she reduces turn meter with her special whenever maxed. At level 5, she's going to grant a ton of dodge to everybody starting on her first turn, and all of your enemies, as most enemies have at least one AoE move, all your enemies have AoEs, and so that really helps mitigate the damage. And just decrease the amount of stacks of pain that are getting put out. So there you go, and again you can boost it, but there are a couple pandas here, so you could make an argument for boosting it fully here, but I think there's more valuable things than probably want to get Foul to like 3 on her physical damage. Robin Bad, you can essentially ignore everything else because again, there's virtually no time where you wouldn't want to use his basic. He does have a counter chance, and you can use that to increase the damage a bit because, again, AoEs, right? But the reality is if an enemy is just gone and hurt you, giving you a reason to counter, they have no turn meter. So there's no turn meter to reduce. So it would be so much more valuable if somehow that was possible. You can justify more the investment to the counter attacking, but I don't think it's fully necessary. This is the most hodgepodgey team, partial investment team. But it is kind of the one where it has the least valuable overall members. So Master Duo is the only one that I would say is required here. You can use like a Kyra Venomate combo here because you can use mixed damage against Mega Wheel, and it's still really effective because he doesn't mitigate. This is the one where you're going to feature the most substitutions. The main person I would say that is Master Duo. Have Master Duo here because he provides 2 of those mechanics for you, and the only person who can apply slow is Freezard. And without further ado, we get to Freezard. So Hard Orc, again, this is not a bleed team, right? This is not turn meter reduction focus. This is just you're best off just going for smacking him in the face with some magic damage because he takes reduced physical damage. And these are going to be members that are either not fighting against Erochar, or it's the one team you're going to use to finish off Hard Orc. Because a couple of these characters are essentially necessary to have the optimal team. Burn could be helpful here, but I just couldn't fit it in really You either have to go without a lead or go with a lead that doesn't affect anyone except 90L and potentially Kelrian. Yeah. So, Patriarch Cheek, everyone here is Order, so that's going to help with the sustain a bit. Xantara is there. She provides the rest of the healing, as well as some decent damage. Like, she provides the best damage out of any of the healers, because she heals with both her primary and her second special, while still doing damage. So she doesn't have to give up damage as often in order to still heal. 90L, again, going through like the abilities, Patriarchy gets some significant, more valuable increases to his basic. If you take it to 4, you want to have the shield max, and that's not just for applying the shield, although that is definitely equal to the reason, but also because you then remove 2 debuffs, which is really solid because you're going to get multiple stacks of debuffs from, from Hard Orc's basic, as well as all the ones from his AoE. So that allows you to get rid of more than one, which is really useful, particularly like on your tank. If they're like getting low, but they have heal block put on them, get them up, or reduce the stacks if the ticks aren't as hard. And then getting the lead max it's so useful in so many areas. You don't really need to get it there, but it's so useful in so many areas of the game. I'd recommend it. Sorry, and I skipped a couple there. Getting his AoE defense buff, defense increase buff to the team to 5 is really useful and valuable. And then honestly, his passive is really not that great. I would not go above 4, but it's kind of worth it up to 4. 90L, I put 4+ here because, again, her damage is just so good. You probably should have it at 6, but like you can't not have it at least 4. You've underinvested in that if you don't have it there. You got to max out the next 3. You really do. You get so much damage from it. If you circumstantially feel like you need to apply an ability block. And there are some circumstances where you might want to do that. For example, against Hard Orc, I really like splitting up. I like trying to get rid of Mar after he's used his self buff and before he can use his AoE, because at that point, once I stagger that out, I'm going to give myself an easier. I'm not going to get hit with an AoE that's been buffed, and that helps out a lot. So if I feel like I need to nuke him and that's more valuable to me in the long run, not taking all that damage, I could do that. So Kelrian, so the magic drummer increase is only going to help against freaking Corcrim, gosh. It's only really going to help against Corcrim because the other 2 do physical damage. But you are going to be trying to primarily get rid of these guys with AoEs from Freezard and a little bit of help from Kelrian. But essentially, you're trying to get rid of these guys from primarily from AoEs. So you're going to see them around a little more. And so having that is not invaluable. But the main thing is the tenacity increase. That is going to reduce the amount of stacks that he's going to take from Hard Orc. From the various, whether it's, again, like the healing immunity or whatever. He is not best in slot here. That's not what I'm saying. But this is for if you're kind of fielding at least a few teams. Considering that we're also investing in him for Ember, and considering he's actually really easy to gear up to gear 8. He's really easy to gear up to gear 8. Xantara, you want to have at least the first 3 max. The second one, it can be a little difficult to justify bringing all the way to 6. I think having it to 3 though, for her own sake, so that she's able to. I mean, one of those specials is going to have a cooldown reduced every turn. So I think that's entirely valuable to get it up to there. You can boost it up there to, potentially like reduce the cooldowns. I mean, everyone here, it's useful to have at least their main ability decreased. Patriarchy, if you have the shield decrease, that cooldown decrease, that's great. 90L, it's great on any of her specials. Kelrian, it's good if you land on his taunt, because then you get rid of the turn where you don't have it. Freezard, he's applying turn meter reduction, and we're about to get into that, and defense down, a decrease with both of his specials. So it's not, but because you can't like kind of specify, it can be more circumstantial in its benefit. So worth doing, but certainly not mandatory. Freezard, you want to have the first 3 max for this one. That's not the case for Erochar requirements, but overall, I think Freezard is the #1 overall character in the game who's not a legendary because of his broad use. So why not? His cheat death is, you only get so much out of it whenever these bosses are putting out the damage that they're putting out. So I mean, I get it to at least like 3 because that's easy, but it might give you like 1 hit from something to survive, but I don't think it's worth taking all the way to 6. Right, so the recommended Erochar team. Characters on this team have already been used. Most of them, at least. There's one exception, and that's the one that's most easily replaceable. That is because it is not hard. It's really not to do 10% of Erochar's HP with the right team. That is why specific assignments must be made for Soleus, Hardwork, and Erochar teams, and why it is useful to have your best players finish off bosses, so those crucial characters are available again. So Erochar, slow, armor decrease, and multi-hits are, I guess, your friends here. While counters and assists are nice, days can mess up with that a bit. So thankfully, one character is going to satisfy most of those needs for us. That's going to be Rantha. If Freezer does not apply slow on his first turn, restart it until he does. If you want to get really serious, make sure the first 2 slows and first armor increase are applied. So you would hit slow on Erochar's first turn, it would become his second turn, and you would, again, you would be like, hey, if I don't get that 70% chance to slow on that, on his next turn, on Erochar's next turn, and if I don't get the armor decrease on that turn, okay, I'm going to restart. Past that, gosh, you're just, again, quality of life, the odds that you're playing for are just not worth it. So that's as far as you really want to go. Certainly make sure you land the slow on the first turn. It is not necessary, but you can do the math on the optimal speed range for your entire team, basically to have it set up so that your multi-hitter is always the first person to attack during his turns. The main thing that kind of makes it harder to do is that you have to consider the speed of your Freezard, or whoever's applying the slow, maybe in the future, but currently advising the Freezard, right? When they're applying slow, you know, for example, if Erochar's speed is 120 and it gets half by slow, but it's by a Freezard who has 180 speed, you have to figure out that range. But I don't think it's worth it. I'm just throwing it out there. If people really do want to go crazy, you can really optimize stuff here. This is going to be where my second honorable mention is, who's not even on here. So if you didn't watch the video, you don't see it. If you watch my other videos, you already saw it, but that's it. So that team is going to be Rantha lead. It increases your damage a little bit, helps the sustain of Tromgar here, but Tromgar is not necessarily mandatory. There could be another person here whose lead makes more sense, but in this case, I'm using Kyra, and giving a 25% increase to Kyra's damage is not bad. And there's really not a fantastic leadership here. 90Ls is fine, and it helps her out some, but you're not going to be killing anybody till it's over, so like that part of it doesn't... It helps get some more sustain, but then you lose the sustain on Rantha and Tromgar. So I think Rantha's still the best choice here in this hodgepodge team. You want to have her same as before, X5, XX5, XX6. Freezard, again, you don't need the tier meter reduction for this one, and his primary hits harder than that secondary. So you should really only be using the first 2 moves ever in this match. But again, he's great against hard work, and he's great in so many areas of the game, you should max it out. But here, specifically against Erochar, you're not going to be using his second special that applies to her meter reduction. 90L, same thing as last time. She just cranks out so much damage right now and applies that attack buff to everybody, which is really going to scale up your damage. And it gives you the opportunity to kind of stall for a turn. Again, you can go through all the headache of setting up like your turn order and stuff in a really optimized way. And you should, to a degree. You should have Rantha at the front, and she's a faster character, so that's not that hard. That allows her to, at least more often than not, be the first character out who's going to be knocking off those scales. Which again, you can use Battle Poo for. If he's not dazed, he'll get to come on as an assist, but even then, he's just a second attack, even if he is dazed and doesn't get to assist. And obviously her second special has the multi-hit, which even at level 1, right, is able to completely eliminate the scales on Erochar. So 90L, she's able to, if she's kind of the first one around, max scales, apply that attack buff. By the time he gets back around to her turn, almost certainly she will be able to use her her special or her basic for unmitigated and now buffed damage. So there's also kind of like an ability to stall a little bit with some of these characters. Kyra has that as well. Tromgar, you're pretty much going to want to only use there might be some times where you want to use his second special, but if there are scales up, you always want to use his basic, because it's more important you clear those scales out for the other guys. And if there's still scales on, it's probably early on in the turn. You'll have a second turn anywhere where you could use the regen. It's more important than getting the debuff off earlier, is what I'm saying. So Kyra, again, she's the most replaceable person on this team, and Tromgar's even fairly replaceable if you want to use Kinley instead. But Kyra is someone that can make use of the Rantha damage increase lead, and she is someone that people are, again, generally investing in this game. Her turn meter increase from the invisibility can kind of mess with your calculations if you're going for that optimal speed range. I don't want them slower than or faster than a certain range in order to always have my multi-hitter up first, but I don't think it's worth it. And so I have mine at 6 for her invisibility / counterattack special, and she's also useful because whenever she applies that, right, you can potentially have 2 characters with counterattack on the fire AoE, the burning AoE, so that you'll get 2 skills knocked off from that. Because if you have Battle Poo and Tromgar up, because Battle Poo can't take a lot, but he can take an AoE more often than not. So timing that out with Rantha can be useful. But mostly you want to use Battle Poo as like a bridge gap for Tromgar if he's not going to be able to have his taunt up, just because that's how it landed in the rotation. Or you want to use Battle Poo in prep to have set up for counterattacks. So Kyra puts out great damage. Her special does more damage than her basic, so use it on cooldown if the scales are down. Otherwise, just use the basic. And obviously, if you maximize that invisibility increase, right, you can use her to stall too in the same way you would with Nightingale. She's first up. Go ahead and pop up that turn meter, right, get everyone else up there, and give yourself a 30% increase for your next turn whenever hopefully the scales are off. All right, so this is it. There are certainly some others. Now, the second honorable mention here is Shaolin. So because he has, if you watch my other video, you saw this, but multi-attacks. Really useful, has 2 multi-attacks, 3 and 7, can clear with one and not with the other. If you just want to put in a solid team, putting him in there, you don't need any ability scrolls on him, which is one of the reasons why I consider him kind of like a sneak pick. So I hope this has been useful for you. I hope we're going to see more people clear in Tier 7 soon, and hope to see you around on the forums, and hit me up if you have any questions. Thanks.